We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds.
You know, I don't have anything to prove to anybody. It's real. That's real, man. And something just told me not to bother him anymore. And I don't think I will.
Despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years in a rate of growth more than 3 times that of our population as a whole, despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension.
You're listening to the Nocturnal Journal. I'm Sean Forker, he's Matt Adams, and tonight we have a very special guest on the program. Maz, why don't you go ahead and brief the listeners on our guest tonight?
All right, well, tonight we actually do have an exclusive for you guys.
Exclusive.
Yes, thank you. I'm usually the one who does the whisper. Joining us tonight, we're honored to have a friend of mine, Michael Freeman. I'll call him Mike if that's okay with him. Anyway, Michael Freeman is the son of the late, great Paul Freeman. Anybody who knows anything about Bigfooting knows Paul Freeman. Definitely a controversial figure in the field, but nobody can really deny his contributions for better or for worse. I personally think for better. Just a little briefing how Mike and I met, which is kind of cool. Those who know me know I love casts. I love to collect them. I'm always looking for more. There's just something cool about being able to hold them, and it puts kind of a reality to something that so many people think is not real.
It's a fetish.
Anyway, yes, it is. It's a foot fetish, as we like to say. I saw some stuff on eBay. I had contacted the seller because the seller said, if you want to know, I have some additional stuff. I got to talking to him, and he said he was Mike, and from there we kind of started talking Bigfoot and all that stuff, and yeah, we hit it off, so we've been friends since. So basically, yeah, Mike Freeman is our guest tonight. There you go.
Yeah, we're really happy to have him on the program. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no worries, guys. It's actually a pleasure. I was honored to even be invited on the show. I didn't know anyone even wanted to talk to me. So kind of a surprise, but it's nice to be here.
Yeah, you found the 2 people who wanted to. You're the two schmucks dumb enough. But
apparently I found the 2 schmucks that were dumb enough to put me on the air.
We're pleased to be able to be those schmucks. We really are. Your dad is one of my favorite researchers to follow when I was a kid. Reading some of the reports out that way, and of course seeing his video. The video is probably my favorite piece of Bigfoot evidence, and though a lot of people don't put a lot of credence in Bigfoot videos, this one to me always felt real, and I think mainly it was because of your father's narration as he's doing it, what's going on. He's actually experiencing it as he videotapes it. To me, that was always the biggest tell to why I felt it was the legitimate, the real deal on video, and it's absent from a lot of other pieces of footage.
Well, it certainly is absent from the Patterson film, where you don't have, any audio there whatsoever, and a lot of other films as well. I guess we're lucky that, my dad was able to get the audio recording there, and I've heard a lot of people say that it doesn't sound genuine, that sounds staged. I can tell you 100% from what you hear on that, that's the way that he spoke. That's genuine audio. If you were ever around him, if you ever met him, you can tell that he's being sincere there, and, that's the way that he would talk.
Well, I never met him, but listening to that video, again, to me it sounds like a guy who's out walking around in an area that's had some activity. He sounds a little winded, and he stumbles upon this, and it happens right in front of his eyes. I think it sounds very legitimate. Maz, what do you think?
it's fake. Absolute fake. We got my... No, I'm kidding.
That if I could reach through a microphone, I'd...
Oh, yes. If you could, we wouldn't be doing a podcast. I'd probably be charging people $0.25 to meet you. Oh. Anyway, as far as what I think of the video, there's definitely... I like how both of you guys touched on this, the audio aspect of it, because that's something we don't have with the Patterson video, which is generally considered to be the greatest piece of evidence. And what would we think if we heard it? Because that could be a deal breaker or a deal maker. Obviously, there are people that like to say they can make a living or, analyzing people's voice and speech and stuff like that. So who knows if the Patterson video had Roger Patterson or Bob Gimlin saying something if we would have said, ooh, that doesn't sound real. Or even if you look at trailers to movies or scenes, if you change the score, it can dramatically change the feeling that is evoked. So there's a haunting kind of tone to both the absence of audio from the Patterson video, as well as a haunting tone to having the audio from the Freeman footage. And it's hard to say what anybody would say in that situation. It's easy to sit here like watching a baseball game saying, why'd you swing at that? When you're here, we're sitting at home on our couches. So you can't really, understand how somebody might react in a situation like that. And I think that those words are chilling. You hear them in our intro, and it's just some of the most famous words in Bigfooting. And I think it's the real deal, man. I do.
Yeah, agreed. You always wish there was more. But the video, I think, still stands up to the time. I mean, the quality of videotape isn't exactly the greatest material to work with these days, but just the fact that we have something like that is just remarkable. And, Paul, he did the research. This wasn't like one day he was stumbling around the woods with a video camera. He did his research, and that's what we want to talk about a little bit tonight. We want to talk about the man behind the footage.
And, Mike, too, maybe a little bit if we get to it, I don't know. We'll
Mike.
See how it goes.
We just want to talk. We're just here to talk about my dad.
No, we'll talk a little about you too, I guess. I mean, it's the only it's the proper thing to do, man. We got John here. Yeah, so obviously we are very happy to have you here, Mike. Just wondering, we're going to start with a little bit of background and some questions regarding your dad and growing up the son of Paul Freeman. So, what was that like for you, man? Was it? I don't want to say celebrity, but was there a feel of that? Like, was he a celebrity in the Northwest? And did you face praise or maybe even like ridicule for doing that? What do you remember as a kid growing up as his son?
It's funny. It's not the first time I've been asked that question. It seems like everybody wants to ask me, what is it like to be the son of Paul Freeman? And to me, that's just a silly question because he's my dad. I mean, just like, Sean, your dad, and Maz, you have your dad. That was my dad. And I didn't know anything else, anything different. I don't know what life is like not being raised around Bigfoot. And I certainly don't know what it's like to have any other father. So first and foremost, before any of the Bigfoot or Sasquatch stuff, he's just my dad. I mean, he raised me, he, played with me, he taught me stuff. And so that's the way I'm always going to view him. But obviously I was aware at some point of the Bigfoot aspect. And I was pretty young. I was only 5 when he had the original sighting on June 10th, 1982. And so I wasn't super aware of everything that was going on until I got a little bit older. And then it really came to the forefront of, who he was and what he was doing and what type of, I guess you could call it, celebrity or infamy that he was receiving. And, sometimes it was a little rough and other times it was good. It's kind of cool to see your dad on TV or to read about your dad in the newspaper. On the other hand, it's not so cool to be teased at school or to have people tell you that your dad's crazy or accuse your dad of, being an alcoholic or being a drunk or something like that. So there was definitely rough times with it. But for the most part, I mean, it was kind of cool having a dad that was like that. And like I said, I mean, he's just my dad. I don't know anything else other than that.
It's so funny to see how the times have changed, though. If he was around today in his prime doing this stuff, he'd be like a celebrity. He would be. Kids would want him at the schools, and he'd be doing Finding Bigfoot, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. He might be a celebrity. He might be on TV. I think, if you never met my dad, anyone that has can tell you he had such a personality. He was really a person that was bigger, larger than life. And everyone that ever met him has got some kind of story to tell, whether it be dramatic or just funny. So I think he'd be great, on one of those shows. But in reality, most likely he'd probably just sit back and laugh at those shows. Just if I'm just being honest, it's some of the stuff they do and how the shows are kind of redundant and it's always out there at night, always knocking on the wood, always doing the howling and some of that stuff. And I know they got to keep the show going and they're legitimate and sincere in what they're trying to do. And, anyone that listened to the last show with Cliff, that certainly came across really, really well, with him. But yeah, it certainly would be nice to think that if he was still alive today, he would be getting some of the recognition that he didn't get because of the time period. So, that's a nice thought. And I do think about that.
No, it's well stated, man. I think we're part of the reason we're having you on the show today is to do that. Is because unfortunately, we lost your father too soon, and he hasn't lived to see what I guess the current renaissance, at least, of Bigfoot in the pop culture. Not necessarily the renaissance of Bigfoot in general, but yeah, it's kind of cool to have you follow up the show with Cliff, because Cliff's such a well-spoken guy, and he's part of that, where he was a researcher that was brought onto TV, and so he's gotten both sides of it. But then we have you, that's kind of representative of your father, who was the on the timeline to the left of that, before it became popular and okay, and he didn't have the luxury of having people be kind of sugarcoating Bigfoot and have that softened. There was none of that. He's kind of the one that helped make it accessible and acceptable today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And today you have people that are on TV, and you have people that are celebrities, and they're signing autographs, they're going to conventions, and they're selling casts or evidence. You got websites online. When I was growing up, my dad was just a crazy guy. And that's how, he was portrayed, and that's how it came across. And there was a very small group of people who looked at his evidence or his work as being legitimate, but for the most part within the public, or even if you watch some of the old news segments or read newspaper articles, it was almost, they were making fun of him at some points, and sometimes with some of the things that were written or that were said. And there weren't as many believers, and there certainly weren't as many people that were open to the possibility of believing. But now it's kind of an entertainment industry, so to speak, like, in a way, which, it really has come a long way, since my dad was up and active in the 80s and the 90s.
So I just want to ask you this real quick. It's kind of starting at the beginning, before his first sighting, I believe in 1982, was your Freeman was your father a fan, or I don't want to say a fan, but a believer in Bigfoot? Was that part of his life? Did he have an opinion on it?
Absolutely not a believer. No. And my dad was a guy that grew up in the woods and mountains, hunting, fishing, trapping. He had done it with his dad. That's the way he was raised. It was just part of their lifestyle and how they survived and fed themselves, throughout the year. And so he grew up hunting. He grew up in the woods. Never had ever seen anything that would lead him to believe in the existence of Bigfoot. Was absolutely not a believer. He thought those stories were for drunk Indians or old cowboys that had fallen off their horses too many times. Just something that he couldn't even fathom, because he thought that he knew everything that there was to know that was out there in the woods, because he practically, lived there, spent most of his time for most of his life out there in the woods.
So he has a sighting, and it pretty much it's the hook for him, right? At the moment he has a sighting, that's when this all begins.
Oh yeah, absolutely. From the first moment he saw it, I remember him, saying, and you can read in some of the earlier, like, newspaper articles or quotes that he gives, that he instantly knew immediately that he was not looking at a bear, and he knew that he was not looking at an ape or a gorilla. And he acquainted it to something that was closer to prehistoric man, but something he had never seen before. And, it scared him. It definitely shocked him and put him, into a nervous state, and he was hooked. I mean, I've heard numerous people say that once you see one, you're obsessed with it. You get hooked on it. You've got to look for it. You gotta find an answer to that question. And, that explains my dad 100%. I think the word obsessed is a perfect fit in that situation.
By all accounts, your father wasn't a small guy. He was a tall man.
No, he was big. He was 6'5", 260, 270 pounds.
So running into something in the woods, there couldn't have been really a lot that scared him. I mean, so something like this to shake him to his core, to hook him, and to make a lifelong impact, and for him to dedicate himself like he did, it had to have been a remarkable sighting.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, knowing my dad, being raised around him, you're talking about a man that he wasn't scared of anything. he wasn't scared of man or beast or anything else that he'd ever encountered. So this would have been a first-time situation, at least a first-time situation since he was a child, I would think, of encountering something that actually frightened him. You think that you know everything there is to know about a certain situation or the mountains or the animals that are there. You're set in your ways and what you believe. And then all of a sudden, you're hit over the head and you're thrown for a loop with something that you could never fathom. I can only imagine, what he must have actually felt. And, all I can acquaint is the stories and what he's told me and what I've read and what I've heard from other people. But, I surely would like to know the actual feeling of what it's like to see something like that and have that course through your veins at that moment.
Mike, as you stated, your dad's before 1982. He was an avid outdoorsman. After 1982, he continued to be an avid outdoorsman, great tracker. He knew the outdoors, especially, in the Pacific Northwest where you guys grew up. Did he ever mention, aside from Bigfoot, if you found any proof of anything else, whether it be like an alien, UFO, ghost, or any other cryptid, or was it just specifically Bigfoot that he had made mention of?
Wow, that's a good question, and something that I don't think anybody's ever asked me. Something that certainly never doesn't really come up in conversation. One time, I can remember him telling the story of being in the mountains on a hunting trip, I believe. Now, this wasn't the Blue Mountains outside of Walla Walla where he had the Bigfoot sighting, but this would have been the Cascade Mountains that run through the middle of Washington State, basically what separates Seattle from the east side and Walla Walla and all that, if you're not familiar. But in the Cascades on a hunting trip, apparently he encountered some strange lights in the sky over the trees at one point in time, and this would have been years previous to having any Bigfoot sighting. But I remember him on occasion talking about that and just kind of how weird and eerie that was, and how he had a feeling of just kind of being watched or something not quite right, and him saying that he hightailed it basically out of that area on that hunting trip, and he took himself someplace else where he felt better. So there was one other situation, but can't really say for sure exactly what that was, aside from possibly some paranormal activity.
Do you think your dad was the type of guy? Obviously he did tell you about certain encounters. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about the big one after, and the one in '82. He wasn't quiet about it. He was vocal, not to just the family, but to his job and other people like that. Do you think he would ever keep anything that he saw a secret? Do you think there was anything he necessarily didn't tell you guys?
Oh man, you got me with that one. No, I don't think so. I think pretty much everything that was encountered or that he dealt with was probably at least told in confidence to my mother, if not directly to to me or either one of my siblings or the media. But I think we pretty much know everything that has been encountered or seen. That's a tough question. I suppose it's possible. Anything's possible, but I highly doubt it.
So obviously, Mike, your father was controversial in the field, but there's no denying his contributions. There are many that call him a fraud, a liar, and a hoaxer, and since he's not around to respond to these allegations, would you like to say something on his behalf?
Yeah, I would. And a fraud, a liar, and a hoaxer, that all comes initially, at least, from Good Morning America. And that was a 1987, episode of Good Morning America that he was on. Him and Wes Summerlin were on there. I believe Renee Hinden was on there as well. And what happened on that was some clever editing, I guess you could say, by the producers of that show when he was asked a question of whether or not he'd ever faked any tracks. And my dad was being honest, and he said yes, he had faked some. Now, that was taken out of context a little bit. The show actually edited the show, that question right there, and cut it off with him just saying, yes, I faked tracks. What they didn't do was play the rest of the audio for that interview. And what had happened was, and my dad had actually made a fake set of footprints, like carved out of wood. He was stomping around trying to make some tracks. And it was done for research purposes. It was done for scientific comparison. First and foremost, he was trying to figure out if somebody else was fooling him. Is this possible for somebody else to do? Also, he was trying to figure out the tracks that he was finding. Are they looking like these fake tracks that I'm making? And I think, you can look at it, and I know Dr. Jeff Meldrum even has a quote where he says, any researcher worth their salt has done the same thing. And that quote was in direct response to somebody that was saying something about my dad. And I think you have to do things like that. And you have to, first eliminate the possibility that you're wrong, or you have to eliminate the possibility that somebody is fooling you before you can prove something to be correct. And, I remember being, 10 years old at the time when they filmed Good Morning America. They actually did that interview in my house. I was sitting across the room on the other side, and he explained this to the reporter that, he'd made tracks. He was trying to figure out, if they were comparable, if it's something that could be done, what would they look like? And of course, they don't air that on TV, and all they air is him admitting that he made fake tracks. Whether or not he should have ever done that, that's up for debate. But it certainly put a black cloud over him for the rest of his life and for the rest of his research. And there's a lot of people still today that will just say, oh, he's a hoaxer, like he admitted it on Good Morning America, without even taking the time to actually think about the fact that that's edited.
Yeah, and it's not a great edit.
He may have been doing it,
It's not a great edit either, Mike. That he's talking about the foot cast, and he's like, he admits to making some casts, and then it like rough cuts to him holding a piece of tree bark that have scratches on it. Well, let's check out the commercial.
Well, Scotland has its Loch Ness Monster, Tibet has its abominable snowman, and we've got our own homegrown American monster out in Walla Walla, Washington, of course known as Bigfoot. And Steve Fox recently was in the tracks of Bigfoot.
This is Bigfoot, or at least what Hollywood thinks he looks like. This is a story about Bigfoot and about Paul Freeman, Wes Summerlin, and Renee DeHinden, and what they saw, or said they saw, or believed they saw, or didn't see. Whatever the case may be. There have been an awful lot of Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest, so I flew to Walla Walla, Washington to find out what the commotion is all about.
He looked right back at us and took right off again.
What did he do? What did he do?
He got down just like he'd go.
You're saying he put his hands on his knees
On both knees,
and
and if you don't
panted?
blame me, I'll take you a man right here.
We brought with us Michael Dennett, a Bigfoot investigator and skeptic who wanted to meet some of the folks who claim to have seen the critter.
We want some really solid evidence of it.
You're saying he wouldn't know a bear if he saw it?
I'm saying that's possible.
Wait a minute, hold it. Now, wait a minute, this thing get real rude. This gets farther than just words now. Let's don't be calling nobody a liar, because I'm about to get nothing in their mouth besides teeth.
Enough already. Here are the facts, such as they are. Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or the abominable snowman, has been reported in various parts of the world for centuries. He's recorded in the tribal lore of Pacific Northwest Indians, said to be 800 to 1,000 pounds, kind of a cross between a gorilla, a man, and a bear.
Just dirty old thing, you're nasty.
Wes Summerlin, a hunter and trapper who's part Apache Indian, says he's seen a small family of the creatures several times over the past 10 years.
You've been, tracking for most of your life?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, there's three of them up there. Hey, it's part of the element. It's there. You live with it. You get along with it.
I don't know. I always had the feeling that they were kind of attracted to Grandpa, and it seems to me that a few of them may actually know him, and come to trust him.
Hey, you ever look one of them in the face? It's just like looking at a human. He looks just about like you, except taller. I'm built about like you, and they're a little humpy on the top.
Paul Freeman, also a hunter, says he has seen Bigfoot a couple of times. We took Paul up in a small plane to look for Bigfoot from above the remote Blue Mountains, where he first spotted the creature in 1982.
Down there is where I saw him. On that ridge down there, yeah. I think the Sasquatch or Bigfoot was on the other side of this little patch of timber here watching those elk, because that's why they were so spooky. He come right down past this bush here and down this by this bush here and stepped right out into the road, and then he just turned and looked at me, and I started backing away.
Since the turn of the century, there have been more than 2,000 reported sightings of Bigfoot himself or his massive footprints. Plaster casts are often made of them by believers. Paul and Wes took me into the mountains to a secluded site where an alleged Bigfoot track was found a couple of months ago.
See, there's a track up here? Out here, this was made early this spring.
This, you say, is a track. These are toes. That's a foot.
That's right. That's the ball where it sits down. Take your shoe off, or I'll take mine off. And lay your arch right in here. See, I go down here and then come back up again for the toes here.
What does this prove, if anything?
Proves that something's moving.
What does that mean?
Moment of truth.
What does that mean?
That means, my guy, it's either they got to change their attitude or they got a fake foot.
Have you ever investigated a Bigfoot sighting that seemed to you to be legitimate?
No.
Never?
No. Footprints can be faked. They have been faked. We know of at least one person who claims that he hoaxed Bigfoot.
You tried to make fake foot?
Yes, I did.
To create prints?
Yes, I did.
And then you admit that was a fake foot, but you say these are real?
These are scratch marks or claw marks. This is all hair. That's hair. Now,
can we take this and get it analyzed?
You betcha.
So we had the stuff analyzed. A New York City laboratory said it was just like human hair. But that doesn't necessarily prove it didn't come from Bigfoot, a human-like creature.
My contention is that the burden of proof is on the promoters of Bigfoot.
Enter Renee DeHinden, who's been traveling around the country for years following up on Bigfoot clues. He owns 51% of the best and most controversial evidence to date. What does that film show?
It's an animal with fluid motion. As one expert tracker told us, if this is a man in a fursuit, he had to be trained to walk this way. I'm intrigued by the mysteries. And of course, like the old-time prospectors, at the end of the rainbow, you hope to find what you're looking for.
Some people see Bigfoot because their life is boring, because to see a bear is not exciting, but to see a Bigfoot is.
I'm going to shoot one. Put one down, you know, for good.
I think I'd give him on a Bigfoot just fine. Would you give him on a Bigfoot? Yeah.
You see, you never will be able to prove that the Sasquatch does not exist. The myth, the legend will carry on.
Well, I don't know. But if he exists, I wonder if he has a TV set. And if he exists, I wonder if he watches at 7 in the morning. It's 56 minutes after. We'll be right back.
It's not quite like it is today. And during that time period, you know, it's something that was not believable whatsoever, something that most people weren't taking seriously. And so even if you're on a show like Good Morning America, for example, they're not going to portray you as being super serious. They're not going to portray your explanation for why you did something. No, obviously they're just going to make it seem like, yeah, I faked tracks, but I want you to believe me now because that's what I'm telling you is that these ones aren't fake. You know, on that same episode, they made Wes Summerlin out to look like some crazy lunatic guy who didn't know the difference between a bear and a Bigfoot.
Yeah, they made him look bad.
Yeah, they made him look bad, and you know they just showed him like jumping around and getting into positions, and he wasn't portrayed, you know, well either. And Wes Summerlin was a great man and a good guy to be around, you know, and they just made everybody look bad.
Well, you know, on the point of what you brought up before, the faking the footprints, I'm about to say something that I'm sure has been said, but all the people out there who think that you have to believe every piece of evidence or else you don't believe in Bigfoot may take offense to this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Bottom line is, even the holiest of casts and footprints that we revere as being real, we'll never know. At least up to this point, we don't know. We have ones that we think are real, but we can't prove it. However, we can definitively say if a track is fake if we fake it. So I think you definitely have a lot more to learn from doing a fake track because then you know the telltale signs to look for. If that makes any sense, I hope it does. But
oh no, yeah, I mean it certainly does. And you know, you take the fact that like in '82, my dad is finding the casting prints that have dermal ridges on them. which are or would be incredibly difficult to fake. And I believe at one point a forensic analyst for the FBI made a statement about my dad saying that either those tracks were 100% definitively real, or he would have to be the best counterfeiter that ever lived. And if he was, there's a more lucrative business I'm sure he could find himself into, other than like faking, Bigfoot tracks that have dermal ridges on them. It's just silly. But, when it comes down to it, the idea that every Bigfoot track that's ever been found is fake, that's almost a ludicrous idea. To think that there's somebody out there stomping around the woods that has made every fake track that's ever been found since, the mid-1800s? I mean, is that even something that's possible to fathom or think about? It's, I think that idea, to think that every single one of them was generated by a man and faked, is more like unfathomable than the idea of Bigfoot existing.
I was just going to say, that was the sound of everyone's minds being blown.
Yeah, that person had to have a lot of frequent flyer miles to get all that coverage. I don't think in the 80s, was there anybody else really casting footprints besides your dad?
Oh, yeah, there was people out there that were still casting footprints. Westmoreland obviously was casting footprints, working right there around with my dad. He still had Renee DeHenden. He was still out there. John Green, Peter Byrne, they were still, doing work and casting prints. And those were, the main guys. I believe Titmus was pretty active still.
But in the quantities your dad was casting, were they? But in the quantity your dad was getting, were they? Your dad had quite the collection.
He did. He had a lot of prints, and going back to the liar, faker, hoaxer statement, we talked about. That's always been one of the things people say that want to refute his evidence, is that he was too lucky. He had too many casts. And again, I just think that that's silly. First of all, nobody had as many casts as Bob Titmus. Bob Titmus had, I think it's estimated to be around 200 to 400 different casts that he had made. And I believe they burned up in a house fire or a boat fire, something like that. But that guy had unfathomable amounts of evidence in casts. And people don't run around and accuse him of, faking all of his casts. Mm-hmm. My dad didn't have anything even close to that. We're talking 50 or 60 foot casts, around there, which really isn't that high of a number. Then you add some hand casts and stuff in there and hair samples and all this. But, he did have a lot of evidence, but it's not like he just went out one day, found 20 different Bigfoots that were leaving prints in the ground and casted them. I mean, we're talking about 15 years of being in the mountains at least 3 to 4 days a week for half the day at a time, putting in countless hours of researching, tracking, recording his research, writing everything on a map, going to the same spots, looking at travel patterns, going over and over and over again, and sometimes finding nothing for weeks at a time. So, I mean, if you take 4 days a week, let's just say 3 hours a day, and that's cutting it short, for 15 years, having 50 or 60 footprint casts really isn't that much. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that's just a ridiculous argument against him to say that he was too lucky or that he found too much, because people are just thinking but he went out once a month and made 10 footprint casts. That they don't realize how dedicated my dad was to what he was doing, and sometimes it felt like we didn't even see him a lot because he was in the mountains so much. I mean, he put a lot of work in for 15 years. I mean, a lot of work.
You stated that he put so much time into that, and it was over a span of time. Now, at least in recent times, there's kind of been that idea looking back that there's, an asterisk next to his name that he was a fraud or whatever. Do you think it came because now we just read about it and we don't necessarily live through the time frame and see the discoveries as they happen, that we can get a real sense of time? The same way when you read statistics of, an athlete, and you can't really quantify that and understand it because we're just reading something that already occurred.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with it. I think you have a lot of people now that want to find something, and they go out and they find nothing. And they look back at somebody like my dad, who found a lot of stuff. And I'm not going to say it's jealousy. I don't really, want to use that term, but I think it's hard for them to fathom maybe how he could have found that much stuff when they don't find anything. But you have to remember, I mean, he was in, I guess, what I would call the perfect storm. My dad was in the perfect area at the perfect time, and he had the time to dedicate to do the research, and he was educated at what he was doing. He was an experienced hunter. He was an expert tracker. He had been a game guide. He worked for the Forest Service, and he had access to areas that civilians don't have access to at that time, going into the watershed, which is off limits to the public. And he was able to be in some areas, like I said, perfect place, perfect time, lots of evidence, and he was able to document some great stuff. And, today you've got, Joe Blow next door, who's going to go out to the state park here and run around at night with his flashlight looking for some eye shine. And when he doesn't find anything, he's got nothing to tell anybody. And you look back on some of these other people and, I don't know what you say. Maybe, gosh, he's too lucky. Maybe, he must have been faking that because I can't find anything. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, or why they would put an asterisk like next to his name. But, yeah, sure. You combine that with, like I said, Good Morning America, some of the things that were written about him, and you end up with a person that's larger than life and almost on paper looks to be too lucky.
Wow. I think you answered that question. I think it's perfect as we could have hoped. Almost psychic and some of the ways you're just answering the questions before we're able to ask them. And that's really good.
Oh man, my pen's going to run out of ink from crossing all these things off.
Good flow. Good flow. Like it's, yes. But you say a lot that makes sense. And I guess that's the point I've been trying to illustrate a little bit through here. And I apologize if I haven't been doing it well enough, is that, the timing, that this wasn't just a guy once or twice that walked out into the woods and was able to get lucky, that he spent the time. And you're talking about, I think I read something along the lines of perhaps $50,000 he spent in the pursuit of this?
That's an estimate, yeah. That's actually a quote that my dad had given at one point in time, is that he had figured he spent between $50,000 and $100,000 on this research. I mean, my parents sold a house to support it. He sold other personal items to support it, worked a job. My mother worked a job. My mother was a housewife from the time I was born up until the late 80s, never worked a day in her life. My dad was an old-fashioned kind of guy like that. That's the kind of family we had. She ended up having to go to work. There was a lot of money spent and not a lot of money made. So anybody out there that seems to think, somebody would do this to make money in that time period, the late 80s through the mid-90s, that's just crazy. My dad made $2,500 doing a commercial for Dreyer's ice cream. That's the most money he ever made. That's it.
And you're doing this for free, so...
If he spent $50,000, I doubt, seriously, even with the copyright on the video, interviews, pictures, Dreyer's ice cream, I doubt he ever made $10,000. And that would probably be a stretch.
Mike, between the money and the time sacrificed and the negative energy and people making fun of you at school or what have you, I mean, how did that affect him? How did that affect you? How did it affect your brother, your sister, and your mom?
Well, I know it had to be stressful on my dad. He ended up working nights and getting up, getting off work, going to sleep, getting up before dawn, going to the mountains, coming home, taking a nap, working nights. My mother worked days. As far as me and my brother and my sister, we never wanted for anything. We weren't a wealthy family, by any means. But my parents made sure that we were taken care of. We had shoes, we had clothes. If there was something we really, really wanted, if they had the means to do it, they did it. We never went without, I guess, you could say, and even if that meant eating elk or deer or bear during the winter, if that's what we ate for dinner, that's what we ate for dinner. We were always fed, and we were always clothed. But it did get stressful, and, that's part of the reason I think that, near the end, my dad did, for example, sell a large, piece of his collection of his evidence, get rid of that. The money was there and it was good. There were contracts drawn up with certain TV shows and stuff to use some of the footage, and that was nice extra income. But, he had a passion and he made it work. And, we were never homeless, and, we never wanted for anything, and it worked until, it was done, and it was done.
I'm just drawing some, I'm putting myself in the position, he's a man that was really dedicated to what he did. And it's nice to know that the hobby didn't get, actually more of an occupation for him, that it didn't get too carried away with him. Easily could have, I think, but he still had the foresight to kind of pump the brakes when he had to.
Yeah, I think he did, especially when it came to, spending money. I mean, that's why, first of all, he didn't need fancy equipment. He had his natural abilities and the things that he had learned to track, to hunt, to trap. Secondly, we didn't have the money for fancy equipment. The camera he got the footage at Edug Springs in '92 was a hand-me-down from my uncle, my mother's brother, who had given him a camera because my dad couldn't afford to buy one. It wasn't anything fancy, certainly nothing like we have today. He didn't have fancy GPS systems. He didn't have a fancy still frame camera. Didn't even have a fancy truck. I mean, it was always something that had to be fixed. There were a couple things my dad kept that were nice, and that was his gun and his boots. And aside from that, he worked with what he had to work.
Do you think there's something to be said for that? That in this day and age where technology has advanced so far, it seems like we're kind of at maybe we're having too much quote-unquote evidence and not enough real evidence, but somebody like your father, who was, during a time when technology was very minimal, was able to get, so much great evidence. Do you think that evidence is actually hindering us rather than helping us? Or rather, technology?
Well, I think it's fascinating that the two best pieces of visual evidence that we have are 1967 and 1992. And today, with all the technology, all the great cameras that we have, thermal imaging, night imaging, all that, we can't get anything that even compares to the Patterson film or my dad's film. I think that's really interesting. And I'm not quite sure why we can't get anything, but you certainly can't. I mean, the other side to that would be, with the technology we have today, if somebody does come up with a video that's better, it's going to immediately be called fake.
Oh, yeah.
Because we do have the technology to render something like that. So in my mind, in my opinion, I mean, unless there's a body brought in, I don't think you're ever going to get a better picture or a better video than the Patterson film. I think that's always going to be the number one. Nothing's going to surpass it. And if it does, it's going to be criticized. To further answer the question, I think that the technology may actually be a hindrance. I think people are relying on their GPS systems. I think people are relying on their fancy cameras and their, field cameras that they're going to set up because they think they're going to catch something that's not aware that you have a camera strapped to a tree. People are relying on audio recordings and playing sounds and doing all these crazy things that were never thought of before, instead of actually just going out there, tracking, keeping records of it, being quiet, and actually trying to just see something. People, I think, are just too obsessed with trying to prove it instead of actually just trying to find it.
Well, I mean, we do have a lot of great pictures of blurry nothing, so there's small victories, my friend. Great branches.
Lots of blob squatches, lots of dark spots in trees, lots of eye shine. Yeah, I mean, and you get that every day. It seems like every other day there's 15 pictures on the internet of somebody that took a picture of a raccoon in a tree or something that apparently is Bigfoot now.
That's giving them too much credit, man. That's better than what most of it is.
And I don't know if it's people trying to be relevant or if it's people trying to become famous or just trying to get themselves out there for their 15 minutes, which is, more than easily to accomplish in this day and age with all the social media and YouTube and all that. I mean, if you want your 15 minutes, make a video of yourself, like, you know, juggling fire covered in milk or something. You don't have to, like, claim that you're seeing, you know, Bigfoot in every picture you take every day that you go out. That might be a little harsh, but, you know, sometimes I just look at some of this stuff and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
No, I think we do too. I think when it comes to what, at least, you know, speaking on for myself, not speaking for Maz, but I think he and I are the same wavelength here. Most of what we see today is garbage, and it's not researched, and it's not vetted, and I think some of it is people that are very confused, and I think there are people that really want their 15 minutes of fame. And you know, we always talk about this Bigfoot community, this mythical hand-holding utopia that we all aspire to go to. That doesn't exist, but in our minds it may be one day. There are just not enough people that really want to take it as seriously or really want to defend the evidence. And I know after a while, when you become such a staunch defender of what you feel's legitimate evidence, it gets tiring because the assholes in the field and the idiots always outnumber the logical, sane ones. Always happens.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, it certainly, at least, you know, seems that way to me. And, you know, I do every once in a while I come across something that catches my attention. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know, that's pretty interesting, or, you know, that's a possibility. That's kind of cool, that maybe. But it's few and far between. I mean, I have much more respect for the people that go out and look, and maybe they post some videos, they post some pictures, and they just flat out say, hey, I didn't find anything today, or, you know, look at this is interesting. This might be something, but I'm not sure if it is. There's just too many people that are coming up with this and saying, oh, yeah, this is, you know, the Bigfoot family that lives in my backyard. Unfortunately, this was taken on an old flip phone camera, and it looks terrible, but if you look right there in the middle, you can see the shadow from where it was standing before the frame closed, and it moved, and I didn't actually get a picture of it. That just seems like it's happening way too often.
Well, I think Go ahead, Maz.
I was just going to say, if it's got a red circle, it's got to be legit. You know that. That's the rule, if it's a red circle. But I saw, you know, we're kind of getting off track a little bit, but, you know, I saw one yesterday, a post, and it was clearly a big fat tree in the background, and people said, look at this beautiful, cute little juvenile Bigfoot. She's adorable or whatever, you know, and this could be a million posts, so I'm not really calling anybody out. And the worst part of that was that not one person said, what the hell are you talking about? Everything said she's adorable. Oh my God, I can't believe it. And for a split second, I was on the cusp of writing something, and then realized I would be attacked. If anybody who didn't give a crap about Bigfoot saw that, didn't know anything about Bigfoot, they would say, what's the tree? What am I supposed to say about the tree? And it's just like, we have a responsibility as people that are passionate about the subject and that believe in this subject to only get behind and you know, put our stamp of approval on things that are legitimate, because we're already crazies to people. So by putting this garbage out there is like, you know, and people like your dad who had stuff you can actually touch, and that these are the people that are hating and throwing rocks at this guy. It's ludicrous.
Insane.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to put it, you know, and I think that in one aspect, first of all, I guess it's nice that the community supports each other for the most part. And, you know, they will agree with each other, and they'll say, oh, yeah, I see that, or I agree with you. But I wish more people were honest. You know, and what I really think is happening is when you want to believe in something so badly that you will believe anything that's put in front of you as long as it supports your cause, you're not helping your cause anymore. I mean, that's dangerous to do in any other aspect of life, whether it be religious or political or personal. But you see it all the time in this field where people just want to believe so badly that they just randomly, without thought, just believe everything that's put out there. And it's not positive. I mean, it's not a surprise to me that a good majority of the population ridicule and laugh at people that believe in Bigfoot. When you look at some of the stuff that's put out there, it's just, there's some ludicrous evidence.
Well, I think part of that goes to, again, people relying too much on technology to do the work of the human brain, and people that aren't really trained to be in the element or use the equipment that they're trying to use to get the evidence. So let's look at something like a camera, Mike and Maz, an SLR camera. Anybody can use one. It takes some skill to operate one, right? You really need to have some talent with that piece of equipment to get some really good pictures. When people fail to recognize they don't have that talent and they snap pictures and they're so excited about what they see and the first thing they do is throw it up on the internet, logic goes out the window and hello, everybody's going to pay attention to me. Just creeps up, and that's the mindset they get into. And there's way too much of that and not enough critical thinking. The difference between researchers back then and most hobbyists today are the researchers back then had the time in the field, they were experienced, they grew up in the outdoors, they spent time in the outdoors, and they didn't have all this technology hindering them down. And when they did get a piece of equipment, they tried to learn how to figure it out before they went out in the field and really tried to use it.
And if this stuff, these pictures are so good, don't waste them by posting them on Facebook, because anybody can take them and claim them for their own. Go straight to the newspaper. Go straight to the
Geographic.
News. Exactly.
That still exists.
Is it online though?
Yeah, I have National Geographic on my iPad.
You used to get in trouble in school. You would hide in the library in the back section with the native issues.
Oh God, only you.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. But let's get back on track because we went way off course, and we may actually get a picture of a Bigfoot. We're so far into the woods here. Anyway, probably just a branch though. But so we were touching. No, let's circle it red, and then it's a Bigfoot. So Mike, we were talking a little bit about your family and the pressure that may or may not have been on their shoulders from your dad's research, both financially and just emotionally. We touched on your mom a little bit. I mean, what was her involvement? Was she always supportive? Did she actually put a hand into helping with the research? How about your brother Dwayne? Was he frequently involved in that?
Well, my mom was supportive. We'll go ahead and start with her. She actually did a lot of documentation on the evidence that he found. And if you go through it and look at it, a lot of times you'll see her handwriting where she dates it, and puts the location on there and helped my dad file it and document it. And she kept all his pictures and paperwork and all that stuff in order and filed away and handled a lot of the contracts. So you could say that she certainly was supportive. And I even remember her being out in the field with him, and taking a look at some footprints or helping to mix plaster or taking a photograph, something like that. It certainly did wear, I think, on her a lot, especially at the time that he was away, as it progressed and went over through the years. But for the most part, very supportive. And when my dad died, my parents have been married 38 years. I mean, they've been together since they were teenagers, a long time. And I don't think she would have ever stopped supporting him. And I certainly don't think that's the reason that he ever stopped doing research. That was more to do with his health, and just trying to move on, with his life at a certain point, other than worrying about, my mother. Her support would have been undying. To go to the second part of your question, my older brother Dwayne, for a few years was pretty highly involved. I say that with reservation because he was a bit older than me, and he's 12 years older than me. So he remembers a lot more of the ridicule and some of the teasing that came in the early years when I was still younger and wasn't quite really exposed to it or aware of what was going on. And I know that he personally went through some rough times, probably rougher than mine, at school, in the community with some people, and took some teasing, took some hazing, and some things like that. So there was always a bit of resentment there with him, I think. But he did spend time in the field with my dad. My brother, was an experienced hunter, and actually snapped the photographs that were taken in 1988 with my dad. But it was my brother that was behind the camera to do that. And for anyone who's not familiar with those, there are two of them that were pictured in the teaser trailer for my advertisement on the show, so you can certainly take a look at those.
But we forgot to circle them, so we'll have to go back and do that so people can see them.
I think it's pretty obvious.
I think so too, man.
And folks, to send your complaints to Maz, here's his email address.
Sean, what's your email? Can you text it to me, and then I'll say that's my email.
Certainly, that we'll make.
You got
that.
it.
We'll vet all the good hate
legit.
mail for you.
And is that the from what I understand, is that the famous buttocks photo from the butt print casts?
Well, it's not from the butt print cast, no. But the one photo itself is referred to as the buttocks photo because you can see like the anatomy of the buttocks pads, like through the picture, the muscles when it's walking there. The actual buttocks print, what you're referring to, which, I'll be honest here, may or may not actually be Bigfoot buttocks print. I know there's a lot of people that think that it's probably where an elk backed into the bank. Has nothing to do with those photographs.
See, I did not know that. Thank you, sir. That's why we have guests that can enlighten us on the show, so we all can learn something.
Yeah, the picture is deemed like the buttocks pad photo. Some anatomy expert looking at the pictures and don't even for one moment think that I can recall their name or where they were from whatsoever, because I just can't.
Sir Mix-a-Lot.
They were very interesting. I thought they were very interesting because of the anatomy and the way that the buttocks looked in the pictures. And to them, that was proof that it was like a living animal and not a man in a suit, because you just wouldn't get that definition if you had a suit on and were all padded up or whatever. So that's why those are referred to as like the buttocks pads photographs. And that was October 5th, 1988, about 10 a.m. in the morning, just outside of Walla Walla, Washington, on the outskirts of the Mill Creek watershed.
So there's many misunderstandings and misinformation around the Freeman footage, Mike, and recently some video was made public showing some additional tracks that were found previous to the sighting itself. You've got the original footage. Can you clarify the origin of the footage, and if there was actually any footage filmed on the same day as the sighting?
Yeah, this is actually something I've kind of been trying to deal with lately for a little while. I guess it kind of resolved itself out as best as it could. But yeah, there was a version of the D-Dug Springs video that was released that had some supposed juvenile track casting pre-footage that had never been seen before, brand new to the public. Oh, look what we found and discovered. Yeah, that doesn't belong together. So first and foremost, I can tell you there were no juvenile tracks found on that day before the actual footage was filmed. That juvenile track casting that you see in that version of the video actually was shot 4 months earlier at a different location that's known as Green Peak. What happened was my dad was going around and doing some displays at local malls, Walla Walla, the Tri-Cities, here and there, stuff like that. They were paying him to come in, set up displays, get crowds in there and hopefully, help out the stores or whatever they do in that type of situation. And he had a display set up and he had some tracks out there and hair samples, whatnot, pictures, stuff like that. And then he had a TV set up with a VCR. And a friend of his that works for the news station in the Tri-Cities had made a video for him. It was kind of a compilation video. It had, of course, the D-Dug Springs footage on there, the famous footage. It also had 2 news story interviews that he had done. There was some other footage on there of him and my brother, I believe, Wes Summerlin's, and some of the footage. And then there's this juvenile track casting that my dad's doing. That day, those casts were made. My brother was actually with him and the family dog. And if you watch the full video, which is on a completely different master videotape than the D-Dug Springs footage, you can hear him talking to my brother and talking to the dog. Now, what's happened is, and I'm going to just leave names out of this completely whatsoever, I don't think that's necessary at all, but a friend of my dad's, a person that I actually highly respect, got one of those videotapes from my dad. He then, not too long ago, when he was asked if he had a good quality copy of the Duduk Springs footage, passed that tape on to somebody else. Well, that person got a little too carried away or thought they were smarter than what they actually were and pulled the juvenile footage out, edited it to the beginning of the Duduk Creek footage to support a claim that they've been trying to make that they think there's a baby in the sighting footage. It doesn't belong together. It doesn't go together. It was never intended to be seen together. And even on the compilation video, it's separated by 15 minutes of additional other footage. So anyone who's seen that, anyone who wants to correlate that with there being a baby like in that original sighting footage, they don't belong together. It's something that was never intended that way, and it's something that was edited on purpose, and it's something that I was not super happy about, and I actually contacted the individual and some other people as well, and attempted to set the record straight, and it sort of was in a roundabout way without the person actually taking responsibility for doing that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question in the best possible explanation, but, that's what happened with that.
Well, personally, I'm waiting for the director's cut, the Steelbook edition, with the additional 20 minutes of never-before-seen footage, unedited. It's the RVert now. What I was going to say is, somebody in the Bigfoot community not exactly being on the up and up, I don't know. So you can definitively say then that those are two separate things that were spliced together. That was not the same day. That's not part of the Freeman footage. Is that correct?
I can definitively say that, yes. The juvenile casting is not part of the Freeman sighting footage. It was not taken on the same day. It's not even taken in the same location. If you watch it, you can tell when it cuts from the juvenile casting to him walking up the road for the sighting that there's a hard edit there. It's not a great edit. You can tell the weather's not even the same. And that the scenery is, an absolute different location, especially if you're familiar with the area. You can tell that it's a different location.
So was it just stupidity or just someone trying to pull a fast one?
I don't think it's stupidity. I think it's somebody that wants to make a claim that they discovered something that nobody else has known, and that they think that there's something in that sighting footage that's not there, which is a claim that there's a baby in what they call the Christmas tree. And if you've seen the footage, you know what I'm talking about. It's the tree that the Bigfoot walks in front of, brushes against the tree, the branch moves, and someone's claiming that when the branch moves, it's because the mother is picking up a child and carrying it off. And if you have juvenile casting before that, with my dad saying, "Oh, there's a mommy and her baby here, and they've gone up the hill and they've come back down, and this one's run up to find its mommy. I can see its tracks right up here. Let me go ahead and cast them." And then my dad says, "Here, I'm going to look around, see if I can see anything else." And then you cut right to the actual sighting footage, and he's like, "Oh, there he goes." Well, you have a good correlation there to go ahead and make that claim. What I think is really funny about it, personally to me, and I don't know if anybody else has caught on to this yet, but if my dad knew that it was a female, and if my dad knew that there was a baby there, and had he been casting juvenile tracks, why then, when he makes the film, when he catches it on the film, when he walks up the road, when it comes out, why does he say, "There he goes"? And why does he say he has gone up the road and come back down? Why would he equate it with being a male if he already had it in his mindset that it was a female that had a baby? And that's the part that doesn't make any sense to me, and I think that's where this person got a little, too smart for their own britches, and didn't even realize what they were editing together. It doesn't make any sense.
But again, that's the thing with the community, and I'm not picking on the community. But when there's an idea, people tend to want to, instead of scrutinize it, especially if it's from somebody that they respect in other respects, or has kind of shown that what they're putting out there has credibility to it. They just want to just want to support it. They don't want to look at it any further. And that was a question I was going to ask you, which I totally agree. Assuming that your father could see better than the video shows, obviously, why wouldn't he say that? And so I'm glad that you attacked that and brought that up.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty commonly accepted at this point, because there's a lot of people that feel like, because of the body shape and because of the size of the belly of the animal that's in that footage, that it probably is a pregnant female. And I think that's kind of a highly accepted idea at this point, that he actually did get a female on footage. I think that just adds to the legitimacy of the video, that he's speaking as if it is a male. You would have to think, that if my dad had set out to, let's just say hypothetically here, if he had set out to fake a video of a pregnant female, why would he refer to it on camera as being a male? You think that he would want to point out to the world that it's a female. And the fact that he says, there he goes, and he's obviously thinking that it's a male, and now it's commonly accepted that it's a female. To me, that just adds legitimacy to the actual video itself and like his initial reaction to it.
Well, I mean, it is 2017, so regardless or irregardless, the Bigfoot can use either bathroom at Target, so that's good news. That day in '92, do you have any recollections from your father, or just from, during, and not necessarily when you're watching it, but just personal experiences that somebody watching the video wouldn't know?
That day, yeah, I remember that day really well. I was actually in the basement of my house. I had some friends over from school that I hung out with, and we were on summer break, and we were playing video games in the basement when my dad came home. And he actually got home. It was pretty late that day when he came back. But, I can tell you, first and foremost, I don't need to see a Sasquatch. I don't need to see any other pictures. I don't need to shake hands with one, if I'm out in the mountains. My entire life, the only time I ever saw my dad scared of anything, including the day he died, the only time I ever saw him afraid of anything is when he came home from getting that video. He was white as a sheet. He was pale. He was visibly shaking, and he was scared. And my dad wasn't a person that's scared. And to me personally, seeing him that way, I mean, that's the only proof I will ever need of the existence of Bigfoot. I don't need anything else. And I could die tomorrow without any evidence ever being put into light or coming forth, and know without a fact that they exist. And that goes beyond just believing, but actually knowing. Just from his reaction when he came home from that. And he certainly was excited at what he had gotten. And at the time, he thought he hit the jackpot. I mean, that was it. It was over with. He'd proven it. He got a video. It's something that he'd been looking for a long time, and he was going to shut up everybody that didn't believe him and that called him crazy or called him a liar or a hoaxer or a drunk. He'd had the jackpot. And unfortunately, it wasn't the jackpot. But I remember that day well, and I remember that night, and I remember watching the video for the first time and just being amazed. And some of the friends that were there with me actually sat down and watched the video. And kind of a funny correlating story that really has nothing to do with that, but I recently went to my high school reunion, and one of the guys that was there was one of the kids that was at my house that day, and he was telling my wife, and some other people that were standing around as we were conversing, man, I remember watching that video with your dad. I tell everybody every time we see that video, I was there the day that he came home with that. I'm the first person that ever watched that. So it's not just me, but other people, have some memories, of that as well. But yeah, that was certainly the day my dad thought that it was all over and done with. And, it's still going today.
How did Dr. Meldrum get into the equation? 1996, right? He shows up at your house one day. Can you shed some light on that for us? What was that like?
Yeah, it was, late 95 or 96, I believe 96. I'll go ahead and trust you on that. Yeah, Jeff Meldrum came down with his brother to surprise my dad. And I'm not quite sure what the intentions were from Meldrum. I don't know if he was looking to expose my dad as a hoaxer, or if he was just interested in meeting my dad and thinking that he was probably most likely going to be looking at a hoax from what he'd heard. But I do know at the time that Meldrum was not a big believer or supporter in Bigfoot at that time. But anyway, to get back on track here, he showed up with his brother unannounced, knocked on our door. I was home at that time. I, have some memories of that day. Introduced himself to my dad and asked if he could see some things, which my dad went ahead and obliged him of and showed him some things. And, one of the great things about my dad, I guess you could say, was that he, without any, anger or bias or anything like that, my dad would just kind of dismiss, people that didn't believe him or his detractors. And he was always polite, to everybody. And if anyone skeptic or believer wanted to see something, he would show them and he would talk to them. And he would explain things to them. And, he was really good and respectful about that. But Meldrum showed up at the house with his brother, wanted to see some stuff. My dad offered to do that. And then my dad offered to take him to some tracks that he had found. I believe they were probably like a week old, something like that. I don't think my dad had even casted them because he didn't think they were very good. When he found them, they'd already been in the ground for a while, and took Meldrum there to cast the tracks. And come to find out, well, you get some great set of footprints that Meldrum absolutely falls in love with, casts, takes back to studies the trackway, finds dermal ridges on the tracks, metatarsal breaks, and kind of one of the earlier starts to Meldrum actually really being involved, in Bigfoot and the research.
We know that your father had his group of researchers, and I think we're going to try to talk about some of them. Can you tell us anything about, Wes Summerlin or Grover Krantz? Do you have any mememories of them coming over the house or interactions with them, both as children? Or you as children, not them. That would be a time.
I actually, Wes and Grover, they're easy guys to remember. Yeah, I remember a lot about, Wes and Grover growing up, and my dad was actually pretty close to Grover, and he was no stranger, to our household. And God, he was kind of a kooky guy, and what I remember most about Grover, probably when I was younger, was just that he smoked all the time. It's like Pigpen on Peanuts with the dirt following him around, but with Grover it was like a cloud of cigarette smoke that just circled around him and just went everywhere that he went. But Grover was cool. Grover he's a character. I remember being also in his, I guess you call it his lab or his office there at WSU as a kid, and just being flabbergasted and blowing away at all of the bones and skeletons and the specimens that were there. And of course, that's like Disneyland to a kid who's sitting there and looking at, all these things. But Grover's kind of a kook, but, very, very serious about his work, and a very, very smart man. Just a good guy, and a big supporter of my dad and a lot of his stuff. And, I say that because he was a big supporter of the 82 dermals, and he's a big supporter of Wrinklefoot and some of that stuff. And also on occasion, my dad would bring casts in or whatnot, and Grover would take a look at them, and there's nothing there. And he didn't want to make copies of them, or he didn't want to study them because they didn't have, the dermal ridges, or they didn't have what he might think would be, the sweat pores or the metatarsal breaks or anything like that. And he would just kind of, dismiss them. And so it's not like he was taking everything. There was a lot of evidence that he wasn't looking at, as well. But he's a good guy. I remember Grover really well. And Wes Summerlin, of course, lived right there outside of Walla Walla. And he was kind of a funny old guy, as well, very animated. The guy to easily, get, I'm not going to say irritated, but someone that you could really kind of, gosh, I don't even know the word I'm looking for here. Just get him up and going real fast. One of the things I remember about Wes is that he used to name all the Bigfoot. So he would have a name for ones that he saw or ones that he had prints of or casts of. But I spent a lot of time around him and his house and his kids and grandkids, you know, and his grandson, Jonathan Summerlin, is still active, and he's, you know, there in Walla Walla in the Blue Mountains, and he's a really good guy as well. And I think, Maz, that you've talked to him a few times as well. But, yeah, Grover and West, good guys. I remember them really well.
Yeah, I've actually gotten connected with John recently, thanks to yourself, and you guys are two great. You know, you're great at carrying the legacy forward. Him, obviously, of his grandfather, and you of your father, and it's great, especially for people that can only read about these things in books. You know, I've read about them in books, and to actually have people you can talk to and ask questions, you can't do that with a book. If you want to answer to a question, you have to find it written down. So it's appreciated from both of you gentlemen.
Yeah. But, you know, what I can tell you, just, you know, to kind of drive that home, you know, especially about Wes, is, you know, Wes Summerlin was a real mountain man. I mean, one of the last of the dying breed, and even more so than my dad, older than my dad. And, you know, they worked in close conjunction, and they agreed on a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff they disagreed on, and I know they taught each other a lot of stuff too. But when it comes to the Bigfoot community or researchers, there's no one out there that I have more respect for than Wes Summerlin. He was a great researcher, and he was a great guy, and he's a legend.
Speaking of legends, it's pretty well known that Rene DeHinden didn't like to keep quiet about your father and his work. Do you remember any interactions with Rene and your dad, or were they always rivals?
You know, I almost talked about Rene and on that last question, talking about Grover and Wes, because I remember Rene well. You know, more so when I was younger, very young, and then he stopped coming around at one point, obviously. But you know, and what's funny is I remember him as being like the little funny man, because he was, you know, small in stature and had the little funny accent, and that's kind of how I remember him. But no, they were not always rivals. There was actually a point in time when they were actually pretty close and pretty good buddies. And Rene used to come down, and he would go, you know, into the field with my dad, and they would ride trail bikes and make casts and look for evidence, and spend a lot of time with my dad. And my brother as well remembers Rene DeHinden pretty well. There's you know, something happened there and caused some bad feelings, and Rene kind of turned on my dad a little bit. But, you know, contrary to popular belief, they were not always rivals. They actually spent a lot of time together. So a lot of people just seem to think that, you know, Rene came out, you know, right from the get-go and didn't like my dad and his tracks and all that stuff. That's not necessarily true. And if it was, it's not something that, you know, he let be obvious or let on.
It's nice to clear the air on these things, Mike. Get the record straight.
So speaking of all these researchers, I mean, do you have any memories of Tom Powell, Vance Orchard, Bob Titmus, or maybe anybody else that you can recall?
Well, you know, we'll start with the first name there, Tom Powell. I've actually never met Tom Powell personally. We've had some email correspondence, you know, back and forth, but he is someone that I respect highly, and he was someone that my dad respected very highly, to the point where my dad actually gave him a good amount of evidence for him to have in his personal collection, and personally asked Tom Powell if he would show that evidence to his kids that he taught in school, and kind of keep the legacy going and just help kind of educate them. But Tom Powell's a really good guy that I have a lot of respect for, even though it's someone I've never met personally. Vance Orchard as well, a lot of respect for Vance Orchard. He was a guy that was around a lot, a really good guy. I remember him and his wife very, very well. And Vance actually wrote my dad's obituary that was published in the Walla Walla Union Bulletin when my dad passed away. And you'll never meet a nicer man than Vance Orchard. He was genuinely just a good person. I don't remember if I ever met Bob Titmus personally. I have a photograph of my dad holding the Hyapalm cast that Bob Titmus casted in California. The photograph was taken by Bob Titmus when he came down in, I believe it was August of 1982 to meet my dad and to take a look at the castings my dad had made. He took a picture of my dad holding that, and he had given the cast to my dad as a gift. I don't ever remember personally meeting him. I do know that he was a great field guy, good tracker, good hunter. He's a respected guy, but not someone that I can personally remember meeting, although I'm sure I probably did. I would have been 5 years old.
Almost like the Star Wars Cantina was your house. It was like a who's who of all these crazy characters. I'm sure there was some weird, well, I'm not going to go down that road. But
there's a couple that, I don't know if you're familiar with John Beck-George or not, or that name, but that's another kind of kooky, crazy person that was around for a while. And
I'm familiar with him.
He tried to convince my dad that what he saw in '82 was a 4,000-pound robot from outer space that had been sent to Earth.
John
like
Eric Beckyard.
So, there were some crazy people around, but finally, you've been waiting for that name to come up.
I'm just waiting.
I'm the only man to ever get him to hang up the phone. I got him to hang up on me. Yeah, he and I had this verbal repertoire on the radio one time, and he insulted me, and I insulted him back, and he had enough, and he hung up. So I hold that distinction of the first person to make Eric Beckyard tap out.
Well, now I know what I have to do tonight, Mike, so prepare.
That guy was nuts.
Yes. So, your dad is synonymous with Bigfoot, or was, and always will be. He was a human being. From what I understand, I'm sure you can attest to that. But did he have other passions and hobbies that we may not know of away from Bigfoot? I mean, you, Sean, myself, we have other things we like aside from Bigfoot, so I imagine he does. No, man, you caught me. God damn it. No, if you could go ahead, Mike, and just tell us more about your dad, we may not know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a life there before Bigfoot, and there was, a life short as it was after Bigfoot, and one, of course, during Bigfoot. I mean, obviously he was an outdoorsman, and that's where he loved to be. That's where he spent most of his time, and it was hunting and fishing, trapping, camping, those things. But he also was an artist, and he liked to paint, and he liked to draw, and he liked to carve and make sculptures and do all that stuff. And he, was a very good mechanic. Actually taught me how to work on and fix cars. And I remember being younger and taking, carburetors or whatever apart and handing parts to me for me to scrub and clean. That was my job. But, my first experience into that. But, I mean, he was a man. He was a regular man. And he worked, and he had a family. And, he had his passions and he had his hobbies. And when he was younger, he was quite the rodeo cowboy. And he rode bareback and he performed in a lot of rodeos. He was actually a Golden Gloves boxer as well. And there's even a story, and I say a story because who knows if it's true or not. There's a lot of stories around my dad, as I will say often. Anyone that ever met him has one. But there's even a story that he played against Will Chamberlain and the Harlem Globetrotters in some basketball game at some point in time. So, there's a lot of stuff there. But when you break it down, he was a man, and he's not just Bigfoot. And it's a shame that that's all that name is synonymous with, because there's, at least to me, there's a lot more there than just Bigfoot.
Yeah, and speaking of a lot being there, I mean, you are Michael Freeman, but you're also your own person. I think we've done a great job of kind of encompassing a lot of things spanning your dad's career, and I'm sure we'll get back to that. Obviously, that's what people are interested in. But let's talk about you a little bit. I mean, what are your passions? What are some of your interests? Let's learn about Michael Freeman.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, I'm just me. I guess that's the best way to put it. What are my passions? Well, I don't sports, I guess, from the time I was born. That was my thing. You know, day and night, football field, basketball court, you know, boxing gym, whatever you want to call it. You know, that's where I was, and that's what I was doing. Unfortunately, you know, too much of an old man now to get by much in that, although, you know, that's what my job is. I coach gymnastics. I've been doing that for a long time, so I'm lucky enough to still be involved in sports and have that be a career for me that pays me money, even if I can't physically perform anymore. Aside from that aspect in the work, I love to, you know, build models and paint, and I've got quite a little, you know, collection of that. Love my old monster movies, love my horror movies, and all that stuff. And of course, you know, I'm married. I have a beautiful wife, and you know, I've got a 5-year-old son, and he takes up a lot of my time. And of course, you know, just like me and my father before me, all he wants to do is fight and wrestle around and be outside.
No better way to be.
I mean, it's a great way to be.
It is. And I think people miss that sometimes now, being out and enjoying the world. So connected to everything else.
And he loves to camp and he loves to fish. And, you know, I make sure that I try to do that stuff with him that, you know, my dad did with me and teach him all that stuff. And, you know, just I remember, you know, taking him and learning to fish and the first time and trying to explain to him and show him how to, you know, put the hook on and put the bait on, and which brings up, you know, a funny thing, because with my dad, you know, he would take us fishing, and we were a big fishing family, and it seems like that's what I was doing every weekend for the majority of my life was I was out fishing somewhere. But I remember with him, it was when you can tie your own hook, you can have your own pole. So I remember being like a small child and sitting there and trying to actually tie the right knot to get my hook on to impress my dad, so I could actually like bait my own hook and have my own pole, because he wouldn't do it for me. He made me learn how to do it myself. You know, getting away from me a little bit and back to him. But, you know, that's the kind of dad he was, and that's the kind of, you know, man that he was. And I learned a lot of stuff from him like that. You know, self-sufficiency being, I guess, probably the biggest lesson I ever learned.
So, Mike, do you yourself believe in Bigfoot? Have you ever had a sighting? Do you go out in the field? Have you seen tracks? Do you care about, you know, carrying the mantle, so to speak?
Well, I mean, we did cover it a little bit earlier that I am a believer, and it goes beyond, you know, being of a believer. And in that aspect, I agree with Grover Krantz, who I believe said, you know, believing in something is a term that you use because it makes you feel a certain way. It makes you feel good, or it makes you feel like you belong to something to say that you believe. I'm convinced that they exist. And to me, the question will never be whether or not they exist. To me, the question is, what are they? And I think that's far more important. And I also think that it's a far greater task to prove that they don't exist than it ever will be to prove their existence. So, you know, to answer the question, yes, I am a believer. I have never actually in person had a sighting. I was not, I guess you could say, lucky enough to have that type of encounter like my dad was, and my older brother as well. But I have been very close to one, and that is an eerie feeling. I remember being with my dad. I believe I was 12 or 13, and we were out and actually got caught up in a rainstorm, a pretty heavy rainstorm, heavy enough that we needed to take shelter. And on our way back to my dad's pickup truck, actually coming upon some tracks that were behind us that were so fresh that they were not yet wet. And I remember my dad ushering me to the pickup, getting inside, locking the doors, turning, you know, the engine on and running the heater, turning the headlights on, basically telling me that it's there, it's probably watching us, seeing what we're doing, you know, making sure that, you know, we're not there to harm it or whatever. But I have to assume that we were very, very, very close, close enough that he was convinced that at that moment it had its eyes on us. Never actually got to see one, though. So fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, it depends on how you look at it. If I had, maybe I would be obsessed with it like a lot of people are, and maybe I would be out there, you know, constantly trying to carry on that, you know, Freeman name and carry that torch forward which is something I don't really do. I wouldn't say that I'm active in the field. On occasion, I will take a look at something. If something is reported or happens close to where I live, I might take a drive out there. I might look at something. Somebody might tell me about something that interests me. I think in the last 10 years, I've probably went 4 times to check something out, and none of those times they have been anything like whatsoever. I mean, really nothing there. A set of prints one time that were so washed out by the rain that it could have just been a guy in work boots going down a trail. I mean, honestly. So I wouldn't say that I'm active in the field whatsoever, but that certainly doesn't mean that I'm not educated in the field, either. It's something I grew up with, and I am just as educated, if not more so, than a lot of these people that you see out here, trouncing around with their cameras and whatnot. I just, I'm too busy, and I have too much of a life, and I don't want to spend the majority of my time doing that. And I'm not going to, be that person that does that. And part of me thinks that, later in life, before I died, that my dad may have, slightly regretted, doing that. And I know that the last interview he ever gave was with Tom Powell, and for the BBC. And one of the questions, that came up was about him not doing it anymore and kind of leaving that legacy behind. And my dad said that if one was crossing the street right now in front of the house, that he wouldn't even step outside to take a picture of it because no one would believe him anyway. And in the long run, it just wouldn't be worth it. And it's something that, has stayed with me and I do think about. And, I don't know, maybe one of these days somebody will convince me to do something and maybe they won't. But Finding Bigfoot certainly tried. Animal Planet 3 years ago approached me, tried to get me to come on that show. And whether you call it just smart or just not caring enough, I don't know what it is. But, I turned them down, and I don't have any interest in doing that. I'm not looking to be famous off my name or for that. That was my dad, and first of all, I'll never get out of his shadow. So even if I wanted to do something like that, I would always be held next to him and in regards to him. And as big of a man as he was, his shadow's even bigger. I mean, it's something I could never come out of. And I think that personally, my belief anyway is I hope nobody ever finds them. I don't want a body. I don't want someone to kill one. I want them to be left alone. And I don't really want to be a part of exposing them.
Recently, Mike, you've become acquainted with the Bigfoot community. And throughout the night, we've touched upon it in different ways. And you've probably seen a lot of the unjustified, unwarranted comments and the crazy pictures. And, how do you feel about that? How do you feel when you see a post and you see someone, just making stupid statements or just thoughtless statements about your dad's work? Do you bite your tongue? Do you respond? How do you handle that?
Let me just say that for the most part, I've had a really good experience with the Bigfoot community. And it's something that's kind of surprised me, and I wasn't really aware of the existence of it until a couple of years ago, and then just recently have gotten more involved. But I've met some really cool people and had some good experiences with that. And obviously, Maz is part of that community, and Tony and yourself as well, and also Dave Groves, who's a good guy, and I'm friends with him. I've had good experiences with the community, and I've also had some not so great experiences with the community, and I've had some people personally message me and say some kind of nasty or rotten things, and they just get blocked. That's pretty much it. I don't waste my time talking to them, and as much as I would like to just jump out there and defend my dad at every turn, it's really not worth it because it's just going to be an ongoing situation. And for the most part, I just bite my tongue. And I do see things that are posted, and I do see people that make statements or post videos or pictures of stuff that I think is silly, for lack of a better term, ridiculous, maybe even, fake. And usually I just bite my tongue. And Maz and I have had some personal conversations, and he knows how I feel about this because sometimes I'm like, man, I just want to say something about this, and I'm not going to do it. Like, I'm just not going to put myself out there, and I'm not going to start that controversy because I saw my dad go through it. And I see the things that people still say sometimes about my dad. And whether or not I have personal feelings one way or the other, I don't really want to be the guy that says that about somebody else either. That's why earlier when we were talking about like my dad's video and stuff, I'm just going to leave names, out of that kind of stuff. I'm not going to call anybody out, and I don't want to start that. But, there certainly is a lot of reaching within the community, and it's a lot of people that really, really, really want to believe.
I think you stated that very eloquently, and I think it's a struggle that Sean and I even have, and I think anybody who comments on something or puts themselves out there, for every 100 photos I see, I might slip and say something dumb on one that will catch heat, and I'm sure there's stuff on here that people may take offense to, and it's a hard line to walk for us. I've been lucky enough, Mike, to have some original photos from you, which I cherish, and I told you, and I tell you all the time that it's just like, it's you have visitation rights, I'm just holding on to these. Because people don't realize is that, to me, that's Bigfoot history. To you, that's family photos. And I think it's hard for people to separate that. And I think that it's easy to speak ill of someone without realizing that there's people left that have to deal with that. So it's a double-edged sword. I think there's those in the community that definitely know your dad's work and appreciate it and realize what he's meant to it, and that we have shows today like Finding Bigfoot, and we have Bigfoot T-shirts you can order online because of guys like him who put up did all the hard work when it wasn't glamorous and it wasn't cool, and that's why today is so important to have you on the show to let people know that.
Agreed.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, really, it's without the guys that came before us that we wouldn't be able to be doing a podcast like this, or not to get all mushy or sentimental or any of that, but because it's supposed to be a fun show, Maz. But it's important that we do respect the history of what we're doing and the legitimate work that went into this. And I don't know, I'm just thankful. I'm thankful that the footage was taken. I'm thankful of your father's work, and again, somebody I've always appreciated it. It's just really cool, and I'm just fortunate we're able to talk to somebody associated with Paul Freeman and get that behind the scenes, the real story, because that's what's really important. It's not so much what was seen, because the world was a different place back then in terms of technology and availability, and it's nice to be able to hear the behind-the-scenes story of the man behind the footage. And I just want to, really thank you again for coming on and being very candid about everything with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. And, I was looking forward to the chance to talk to you guys and talk about some of this. And I had promised Tony and I had promised Maz that, you guys would be an exclusive and I wouldn't talk to anybody else. And they got turned down like 5 other podcasts waiting
you
for
held
this
out.
actually come by and get some work done, and some of them turned down because I was waiting for you guys, and a couple others turned down because I just don't want to talk to those people, but I appreciate being on the show and being able to talk about my dad. And I'm not going to say necessarily defend him or convince anybody, because I don't think there's anything really to convince anyone of or defend. If you're a believer, you're a believer, and if you're not, you're not. And everybody has their own opinions and their own faith and the things that they want to believe in, and that's okay. I'll talk to skeptics all day long. It doesn't bother me one bit when someone doesn't believe. But I do think, speaking to all subjects, not just this one, that if you don't at least take the time to consider, then you're making a mistake.
And I don't want you to think you're getting off that easy, because it sounds like we're done with you. We're not done with you.
We're not.
Man.
That just kind of...
We still have an hour and 15 minutes.
It was nice, guys, by the way, and I'll talk to you next time.
All right, that was Michael Freeman hanging up on Sean again, number 2 now. So speaking about, we spoke about your dad for a lot of it. We spoke about your mom, your brother. So let's get to your wife. I mean, you mentioned you're married. How does she handle this? I know that recently I kind of take credit for coaxing you out of your cave of being away from us crazies here in the Bigfooting world. But how does she feel about that? Does she have any interest in it? Did she know about who your dad was, this aspect of him, before she married you? Any of his work, or what's the deal there?
Well, no, she did not know who my dad was. Actually, my wife, her name's Whitney, and beautiful and supportive woman. Couldn't ask for a better wife. I just want to go ahead and say that right there out on the air. Just a beautiful human. all around. So I'm a very, very lucky man. But both my parents, had died before we even met. We got married without her ever knowing. It's something I didn't talk about, and it's something I hadn't talked about for years. Actually, it's one of those situations where you never know how someone's going to react, and sometimes the anticipation of how they're going to react is worse than what actually happens. And so we met and we dated and we got engaged and we married, and she never knew. And it wasn't until a little bit later that it actually, came out. And, for her credit, she's interested in it, never poked fun of me or anything like that, never doubted anything. If I want to show her something, she's interested and she's supportive. And, I've never asked her point blank, whether or not she is a believer, and I probably never will. Doesn't matter to me, one bit. What matters to me is that she knows that that's my dad, and that she respects, my dad, and she respects what he did, and she thinks it's cool that I was coming on here tonight, and she does think it's cool that I'm starting to talk a little bit more and kind of get myself out there and not just, live in my little rabbit hole, and never talk about it. But no, she's really good about it, and her little sister actually is quite into Bigfoot and finding out some stuff, and she's kind of new to it, but she's very interested. So that's someone that I get to talk to as well in the family. And my son Grant, he's totally like, oh, it's Bigfoot, and then watch like videos, and then he's always asking me questions. Dad, is Bigfoot real? Is Bigfoot real? And like all this stuff, and so it's kind of cool. And he's got my dad's old field hat that he wore, and I gave it to my son, and he likes to wear that around and act like he's a cowboy or some kind of zombie killer or whatever. But it's it's kind of cool to see my dad's hat on my son. So I think I'm a lucky guy in that regard.
And speaking of your son, I mean, what does he know about his grandfather? I know this might get a little touchy, so I apologize, but just curious, does he ask any questions about him? Does he know, the full spectrum of what he did in the Bigfoot community, or how he's regarded, or do you plan on really going in depth when he's a little bit older?
Yeah, I mean, he's only 5, so, as far as like the spectrum and how it's regarded, he's not really aware of that. What he knows is basically what we watch or pictures I show him. He sees the Deduct Springs video online, and, we watch it or whatever, and he, points out Bigfoot and gets all excited, or we look at pictures and stuff like that. But, aside from that, not much. I mean, I tell stories, about him and stuff like that, so he knows a little bit. But as he gets older, I guess we'll get more in depth and kind of talk a little bit more about the whole thing and how it's regarded. And if it's something that he's interested in, great. If it's something that he's not interested in, then he's not interested, and we'll talk about something else. It's this has never been something that I am considering or even willing to force on anyone or shove down their throat. That's never going to happen.
So apparently Maz missed the memo and thought he was writing for the Oprah show this week. So
Did I give everyone a car or something that I don't know about?
Some really touching questions here, Maz. Man,
oh God,
you're a softie at heart. I think why we're going to be good partners moving forward.
Well, exactly. Plus, I always keep the tissues close to the computer. Wow.
Oh,
no.
Well, Maz is a married man now, so he's got to start thinking about all this stuff, because I'm sure he's, is going to have his own little brood here one of these days popping around. So, they're going to want to know the full spectrum of how he's regarded in the artistic community and the Bigfoot community. So he's just preparing. That's all it is.
That's the name of my autobiography. It's going to be called Maz Adams, From Brew to Brood.
Brood to Brood.
It's like, this has been a roller coaster of emotions, and I usually don't like roller coasters, so maybe I should keep away from that for the future.
This is great. This is good stuff. We could win an award for this.
I don't know what sicko would have an award and who would be dumb enough to vote for us, but I will accept it on behalf of both of us, Sean.
You're going to have to, because I'm going to be dead.
God.
I will say, in regards to that conversation we just had, one of the things I will say is they've seen it a couple times on occasion. I'll pull out the Dryer's ice cream commercial, and I don't know, either one of you fine gentlemen have ever had the experience of watching my dad's Dryer's ice cream commercial, but it's something to behold. And just for the fact that he was not a really good actor, number one, and number two, it's just kind of silly and ludicrous. But we will pull that out and watch every once in a while. And my wife and Grant, they both they laugh at that. They think that's pretty funny. So
well,
I find myself
am
laughing at it as well.
I'm lactose intolerant, so I have no interest in buying that. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure it's delicious. But no,
what a dick!
But you know what? I'm a glutton for punishment, so I don't care because I'll deal with the aftermath of it after. I love me some ice cream.
And just so you know, just to drive that home again, that was Dryer's ice cream.
Dryer's ice cream.
The most delicious ice cream on earth. Dryer's ice cream. So good, you can't get enough.
We're getting sued now. Thank you for that.
I better get a check in the mail.
I'm YouTubing it right now. I'm trying to... Is
no,
it on YouTube?
As the story goes, my dad was not very good at his lines, and part of the commercial is him eating ice cream, and as the story goes, he ate so much ice cream that he got sick.
Yeah, I have it right here. I just sent the commercial to Maz so he could see it on YouTube. So that's the.
And if you hear anything, that's my stomach churning. It's starting already.
Quite the gym. It's a good commercial. You know, it's funny because I remember sitting at home, like on the couch, like with my family, and then my dad come on TV, like on a commercial. So, you know, I guess that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, the commercial's not that bad. It's just the chops in between, the black screens with the words on it. Paul Freeman, Sasquatch Observer.
That's
Paul
not
right,
Observer.
Yeah.
He had him in Bigfoot. He must have been about 8 feet tall. Takes another bite.
800 pounds.
Well, that's because he was eating that ice cream, and lots of good for your bones and for your hair. But
it was unbelievable. I think that's what he says.
At least he didn't say like unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
I saw Bigfoot with my own eyes. About 8 foot tall with hair all over. It must have weighed 800 pounds. Now here's something really unbelievable. Edie's Grand Light is as good as regular ice cream, but lower in calories, and 93% fat-free. Scout's Honor. If anything could lure Bigfoot out of the woods, this just might.
So we did touch on this a little bit before, actually a lot bit before, but it's still something I want to talk about and bring it home. So if your dad was still with us today and he saw the state of the Bigfoot community, what would he think? You know, how would he feel? Would he support shows like Finding Bigfoot? Would he still be researching? Would he be doing conventions? Would he be interested in doing engagements and teaching people? Would he be involved in the field? Or, as you had mentioned before, do you think he was burned out towards the end and wouldn't want to partake anymore?
Well, you know, he was such a personality and just such like a vibrant like guy. He'd probably be starring in some TV show. That's what, you know, I just kind of always pictured is, you know, if he was still alive or they had this kind of thing going when he was, you know, doing his research, that he'd probably have his own TV show. No, I think he would be all right. I think that, you know, it would be nice for him to see some type of positive recognition within the community. And it's one of the things that I really wish would have happened, was that he would have lived long enough to really get some positive feedback and some positive, you know, recognition for what he did. And so I'm sure that if he was still alive, he probably would, you know, make an appearance here or there and maybe, you know, give an interview here or there. Maybe, maybe not. He might tell people to go jump in a lake. He doesn't want anything to do with it. You know, and he's one of those guys that, you know, he was honest to a fault, you know, and you never knew what he was going to say because he was always going to tell you what was on his mind, and he was always going to tell the truth. And so, who knows? He might not approve of it, but I think that for the most part, he probably would.
So, Mike, I think to kind of bring everything home finally, and this has been a crazy journey, and we've really enjoyed it, and we appreciate you being here. But how do you want people that have an interest in the field to remember your dad? But, you know, more importantly, overall, how do you remember your father?
You know, I just hope that people remember him as a guy that worked hard for what he found. He's someone that, you know, was a pioneer and that helped, you know, the research advance, and someone that did it the right way. that put in the effort and that put in the time, and that made some, hopefully, what could be considered, significant entries of evidence. I hope they remember him as someone that helped advance the science. And as far as I go, how I remember my dad is my dad. To me, he was Superman. And, that's how I'll always remember him. Unfortunately, he got sick, and he wasn't Superman anymore. And the last thing I do remember of him is being, old and sick and weak. But, that's not who he was. And so, but, yeah, my dad he was a good man.
I'll drink to that.
I will have some ice cream to that.
You and the ice cream. You're lactose intolerant, Mez.
I told you, I'm a glutton for punishment, and I'm not gluten-free. Gluten-free.
That's gluten-free.
Glutton.
So tonight...
you are definitely not gluten-free.
Tonight we've alienated the vegans, the gluten-free audience, perhaps the... I don't know. Let's continue on.
If we return next week, we'll come up with a list and get the rest of them.
This is the segment of the show where we talk about a historical piece of Bigfoot evidence, Bigfoot film footage, Bigfoot video footage, something historical in the world of Bigfootery. And this week, because it's appropriate, we've chosen the Freeman footage.
Yes, that is correct. So we've peppered a little bit of it here and there, some thoughts on it, and as we did last episode with Cliff, we tried to pick something fitting, and we're doing it again, and we're going to try to get Mike involved. He's been kind enough to stay through this insanity and kept the course and been real level-headed through this. But so from what I understand, there's a lot of misinformation online, a lot of confusion. A lot of people put it at 94. It's 92. I believe it's August 20th. Everybody knows the famous footage. A lot of people say it's the second best. Some people say it's the first best. No matter where you rank it, it's one of the best. And no matter what people think of your dad, even those who may say that he falsified a lot of evidence, he was a hoaxer, even those people, a lot of them will say this is the real deal because it speaks for itself. I know we've discussed the timeline and the time frame of it and what it means. So we're just all going to give our thoughts on it. I mean, Sean, you can say it. Mike, you can say it. And like I said, we touched on it, but I think we should expand a little bit more on it. So, Mike, anything you want to add about the credibility or validity of the film, or any other thoughts?
Well, first of all, you're correct. August 20th, 1992. I know a lot of people think that it's 1994. I hear that a lot. The copyright was placed on it in 1994. And you will see some versions of it that say copyright Paul Freeman, 1994. That's where that confusion comes from, but it was 1992. As far as the video goes, I guess what a lot of people don't realize is that it wasn't just a lucky one-time deal where he decided to drive up to Dita Spring, whip out his video camera, and there he goes, across the screen, and he gets footage. He'd actually been going to Dita Spring for quite some time, for a long time, years, as a matter of fact. But that particular summer was a very dry summer. Most of the water sources were getting very low or had dried up. And it was one of the only usable water sources in that area that was still actually functioning. And so he had a pretty good idea that that's someplace that they may possibly be frequenting. And he was getting up early in the morning, before daybreak. He was going up there every day. Nothing. Every day, nothing. He'd find a footprint. He might find a handprint. He might find some sign that they were there. Nothing. And he had it in his brain that he was missing them, that he was going too late. And so he started to get up earlier. They must be coming to get water before he gets there because they're aware of his presence. Well, the night before, August 19th, my sister's car had broken down, and she wasn't able to get to work. And that morning, August 20th, my dad decided he was going to go to my sister's house and fix her car. And so he didn't go at his normal time up to the spring. He actually went and fixed her car, and that took, 2 or 3 hours. And when that was done, he had come home, and he wasn't even going to go to the mountains that day. And for whatever reason, he decided, oh, you know, what the heck, I'm going to go ahead and go up there anyway, see if they were there this morning, maybe, you know, get some new tests or whatever. And he ended up being there about 5 hours later than he normally would, and he walked right up on them. And so instead of thinking that they were coming earlier to avoid him, they were obviously coming later to avoid him. And the fact that my sister's car broke down is probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to him, like in regards to, like, you know, Bigfoot and that type of research, because him being late that day surprised them. He walked right up on them.
That's a great bit of insight for those, because like I said, we only have the video, and that's what most people know of it, or what other people may have said based on other people, and that's part of the beauty of having you on the show, is to clarify and give this director's behind the scenes look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, what do you have to say, bud?
Again, I've said many times over the years that the footage that Paul took, to me, is the best piece of Bigfoot film footage that there is, film, video, whatever you want to call it. I think there's a lot of genuineness when he's, the whole setting, because, we only get to see a short amount of it. We only get the video that we see. We don't know the backstory up until now. As he comes across the creature, definitely startled. I think the emotion behind it is very telling to me. And that's just still today, after all these years, 20, I've been researching this since I was a very young man. It's the most important piece of film footage for me. I place it above the Patterson film. That's just my personal take. I've just always felt it to be valid, and that's where I stand by it.
And, I just want to say, and I think it's important for people to know, we're not giving Mike lip service, He is a friend of mine. Obviously, we're having him as a guest, and we're not trying to kiss butt or anything like that. What we say is genuinely what we feel. I've always felt like Paul Freeman is the real deal, and I've always thought it's been unfortunate that he hasn't had a chance to defend himself from a lot of people. And I'm with Sean. I think it's a great piece of evidence, and whether you want to rank it 1 or 2, it doesn't matter, because it's all these years later. I think after the Patterson film, which I believe was 1967, we needed something that would kind of re-spark, because there hasn't been anything great since then, and this kind of carried it forward into the next generation, and I think that's important. And no matter what you think of Paul, or based on what you read, or whatever, what have you, we owe a debt of gratitude just for this piece of footage alone, not to mention everything else.
Agreed. I wholeheartedly believe that. To the point, the Patterson film, I've met Bob Gimlin. Bob Gimlin's a very nice guy. I don't know the validity of the Patterson film. I believe Bob Gimlin's telling me the truth. They've beaten that film up to death, to the point where I don't think anybody's going to relent either way. If it's proved a hoax or not, it's never going to be definitive, right? Nobody's done that with the Freeman film, the Freeman footage. I don't remember a single time someone's tried to replicate it or duplicate it. 1, I'm fine with that. 2, that in itself is telling. There's a lot more there. There's a lot more movement. There's a lot more to the Freeman footage than there is to the Patterson film, in my opinion. It's just important to me. And Mike and I have never talked before. This is our first time having a conversation together, this show. So I have no reason to fluff anything. You folks are listening to how I truly feel in the moment. And I've said that for many, many years. On plenty of audio tape, plenty of media, some way, shape, or form. You can hear me talk about what I think about the Freeman film, and that's just where I'm at with it, Maz. Mike, I don't have more to say to it. That's just how I feel.
And I appreciate that. And, I think on a lot of levels, obviously, the Patterson film and my dad's are, different. They're definitely 1 and 2. No matter which way you rank them, I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think there's any other footage that is even going to compare to either one of those. And I do think that my dad's film has some qualities about it that do make it, in some aspects, better than the Patterson film. I mean, the audio being, obviously number 1, the big one. And I guess what a lot of people don't realize as well is that there's more to that footage than what you just see, than what's online, than what people are trying to enhance. There's a lot more to that footage after, the initial encounter where it walks in front of the tree and disappears. He continues down the road. There's actually a second Bigfoot in that video, and a lot of people are aware of that comes at him from a different angle, and you can hear him say, oh, there's 2 of them, I guess. Later in retrospect, I think that adds to the fact that it could have been a female with, at least one smaller one with him, or with her, I should say, I guess. My dad would tell you that there was 3 of them. And there was another one that he saw that you can't really see, on the video. But that actually turned out to, if you know any of the history of it, not being a very pleasant situation. It's something that actually really frightened my dad as he was continuing with the camera, and eventually turns the camera off for self-preservation, which he chose over filming, because in the process of this, they actually got behind him as he was trying to track them and ended up following him for quite some time, and to the point where he actually went down over a hill and hid himself in the hollow of an old fallout log that was down over the hill. And supposedly, at least according to him, and it's not, something that was recorded, but he was, stuck down there for quite some time as they made some noise and rolled some rocks down the hill, and were not very happy with him being there. And he eventually crawled himself out of there and looped around and got back to his truck. But, there is an interview, and it's, a quote of his that you do hear a lot, and I believe it's even on the original PSR, or the Nocturnal Journal ad, where he says, that something told him that he better just leave him alone. And that was the last time he ever saw one, last time he ever had any type of an encounter. And you can chalk that up to he just wasn't lucky again, or you can chalk that up to maybe he decided that he shouldn't ever put himself that close again.
Well, that's pretty awesome, man. That's really made a one-dimensional piece of history 3-dimensional for me and for a lot of people. And I love the authenticity in you telling the story, and I hope that our listeners can hear that as well. So, Sean, I think we can move on to our next segment. What do you say?
Hell yeah.
All right, I'm going to say that's yes. So we're going to play with you a little game that we debuted last episode with Cliff Barrickman. It's called Missing Link, and basically it's word association. So I'm going to throw at you some of these. They're either going to be people's names, subjects, all kinds of things, and you can just give in a few words or however you want to say it, a sentence, the first thing that comes to mind. So in its simplest form, it's word association. What happened?
Get me in trouble.
We will eventually. If we don't, we'll throw in some bad names. No. So you can say plead the fifth for any of them too. Don't steal that.
All right.
You really can't. I'll edit in something from somewhere else, or I'll have Sean do it, and it'll make.
I will not edit that.
You will do it. I'm waving my hand like a Jedi. All right. Are you ready, Mike?
As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose.
All right. Let's start with Tom Powell.
Tom Powell. Well, we touched on him earlier. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of him is just respect. Great guy. Wrote a really nice article on my dad one time. That's one of the favorite pieces I've ever read about him. That was just genuine and down to earth, and just from a really, really personal level. And even wrote about my mother in it, and included her in her interactions, with my dad. And really, really respectful. Yeah, I believe it's called The Ultimate Field Man, something like that. If you haven't read it, it's a good read.
He had a lot of respect for your father. In fact, a quote I saw is he's referred to your father as the best Bigfoot field tracker ever.
Yes, yeah. I actually have a picture of my dad during the interview with him that's got that quote superimposed over the top of it. Yeah, quite possibly the best Bigfoot tracker of all time.
Yep,
is what it says.
Well, you're definitely from the Cliff school of answering these in one or two words. No, I'm just kidding. We appreciate it from both of you gentlemen. You guys are awesome. And
Maz Adams, dickhead.
I'll do better on the next one. I'll do better on the next one.
You both are amazing. No, I'm kidding. And I just wanted to preface this after the fact, which makes it not a preface, but is that these can be things we mentioned earlier, just to sum them up. And again, my apologies. I'm just kidding around with you. The Patterson.
Well, because I run my mouth all the time, and I just keep talking, so I've already covered everything.
We're a match made in heaven, my friend. Alan, or excuse me, what the heck? I was looking at something on the computer
Who
there.
the hell is
You called
Alan?
me. I was looking at a Star Wars thing, so it was Alan
okay.
Tudyk. I'm sorry. You don't have to. I don't even know if you know who he is. But the Patterson film.
Patterson film?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I thought I misheard you there for a second. Okay. Let's do that one again.
Ah, he's getting snippy with me. Someone's making this bottle. I'm just messing with you.
You can edit it. You can edit it.
He's like, ask me another one. We just talked
Here,
about.
let's try this one again. Maz Adams, dickhead. Okay.
All right.
Next
Okay.
one.
Moving on.
All right.
Oh man, this is getting real. All right, you want to pick another one then?
Patterson film. Did we not want to do Patterson film?
No, we'll do a different one. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I didn't realize. How about King Kong?
King Kong. Love King Kong. The original with Fay Ray. One of my favorite classics. Got a diorama model that I built that I'm not entirely happy with, but yeah, I love King Kong. Love the Peter Jackson remake of it as well. I would have loved to have been alive when that came out in theaters because it had to have been something that was terrifying.
How about we're gonna go a little off topic here, but still in the paranormal since we are a Nocturnal journal. The Roswell crash of 1947. That's the UFO crash.
Oh, geez. I'm going to be honest. I actually don't know a whole lot about that. First thing that comes to mind, cover-ups. Definitely. I believe there was some kind of alien autopsy video that was made off of that or something. I don't know. I've never seen that, I don't believe, but I'm not very good at answering these, Matt.
Well, I'm not very good at asking them, apparently. So I should just pick. Dust bunnies. No, I'm just kidding. How about what's that movie like? Suspirium?
Oh yeah, that's my favorite movie of all time.
There you go.
Yeah.
But you can expand on it because I know you love it.
1977, Dario Argento, just kind of a Escher-ish, beautiful nightmare sequence. Love Suspiria. Anyone who's never seen it, you got to go out and get it on Blu-ray. That beautiful movie. Haunting score as well. That thing is just perfect all the way around, except for the acting and the screenplay and everything else. Terrible, but the visuals are great.
How about the visuals are great? Sounds like you're talking about one of my kind of movies. The acting is terrible, but the visuals are great. Sean knows what I'm talking about. How about horror movies in general, modern horror movies? What are your thoughts on those?
Modern horror garbage.
Cabbage.
Yeah.
Cabbage.
Garbage. No, I mean there's some good stuff that pops up now and then. And I've seen a few films recently that aren't too bad. I think the last great horror film that was made is probably The Ring, actually. I don't think there's been anything better than that made since. I much prefer, like, 70s and 80s horror. But I'll watch every one that comes out anyway, because that's just me.
Okay, how about, again, we're going to touch on something we've already talked about. Grover Krantz.
Love Grover Krantz, too. I think Grover, very smart man, and I think probably could have accomplished even more than what he did. One of the things I always think about when I think of Grover is an interview that he gave, and him basically saying that, the Patterson film is great evidence to look at from a distance, but you can't touch it, you can't hold it, and you can't examine it, and that he's more interested in that hard evidence that he can hold in front of himself and that he can look at. And I do believe that he said that the 82 dermal prints that my dad made were the best hard evidence that he's ever seen of the existence of Bigfoot. And I heard that he threw legendary parties. I've heard the story that he threw legendary parties on campus, by the way.
You Hefner, eat your heart out.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
Oh,
Look at my big foot. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know.
different kind of podcast slowly throughout the course of the show.
Well, you can't win them all.
How about the Loch Ness Monster?
Oh, Nessie. I was actually, always been pretty interested in Nessie. It's kind of sad that it seems like she probably doesn't actually exist. But, definitely something for that classic cryptid thing. Always been a little more interested in what's the one from South America, Africa, Mukeli Mbede. If you know what that is, it's like the brontosaurus that lives in the jungle. That one to me has always been a little more interesting than Nessie, but I think Nessie's probably even before Bigfoot, maybe like my first exposure to like the cryptid world.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I thought you were talking about Baby's Kids. I love that movie, but I didn't know it was. It's a great old movie.
You still it, Maz? You still there, man?
You're low, Maz. You're very quiet.
I can barely hear you, brother. I can barely hear you.
All right. How are we in business?
Yeah, now you're in business.
That's
now,
better.
Now you sound
that's because I didn't realize that in order to be heard, the microphone has to be by the mouth.
Yeah.
You know, Sean.
Oh, right.
You're the technical guy here, so I was really counting on you to help me with this. You dropped the ball.
Well, never mind. We can
the
go.
The ball dropped when I was 13. I know you.
Yeah, I was. Well, I didn't want to go
that's
there.
Where you were barking. That tree you were barking up.
I had my phone on the other side of the couch for half of the interview because I just didn't want to listen to you. So.
I don't know that we offended or no.
I love it.
I love the chase. Anyway,
that's what the court documents say.
What happened?
I said that's what the court documents say. You like the chase.
Well, I don't. You know who? If you don't read them, they don't exist, Sean. How about I Shine?
Oh boy, you are trying to get me in trouble now. I Shine. Wow. I think that's a stretch. I mean, honestly, there's so many different things out there that you can catch in a flashlight. They're going to do that. Trail markers, headlights, the other 250 animals that, reside in that 100 square meter place you're walking around in that are capable of doing that. I personally don't believe Bigfoot has eye shine. That is just my personal belief. But I know a lot of people that do. I just grow a little wary of every single picture that's posted online. Somebody else finds eye shine in it, somewhere. First thing that comes to mind on that is just that's a stretch. I mean, that's what we get for hard evidence these days, and that's pretty sad.
So many opportunities, Sean. I'm gonna let it go. Anyway,
I can't keep up with him.
It's okay. Nobody can. Not even my brain or my mouth. How about Finding Bigfoot?
Never seen it. I have never watched a single episode. I've seen some commercials for it. I was approached by them to do the show. Didn't really have any interest in doing that. I don't have much to say about that. I've heard Cliff is a nice guy. I've had some email correspondence with him, but never personally met him. Sounded like educated and informed, on the last episode of the Nocturnal Journal, and I enjoyed listening to that. But have never seen Finding Bigfoot, and probably will never watch Finding Bigfoot.
Well, we appreciate the plug. It just doesn't do much good if you do it on our show, because if they don't listen, then they don't know. He's like, I'll gladly plug your show. I'll do it on the episode, so no one will ever hear it. Smart man.
Well, I plugged everybody else, so I might as well plug you as well.
You Inception plugged us. Having a plug inside a plug. Let's see. How about Renee DeHinden?
Renee DeHinden, yeah. First thing that comes to mind with him is just the funny little guy, I guess, because that's how I remember him from when I was a kid. Just kind of had that funny accent, was a little guy. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of things that Renee Hinden had said. And I think there comes a point with researchers, especially in the earlier days, where they may or may not have been more concerned with keeping the other guy from finding evidence, and not as concerned with finding evidence themselves. Not mentioning any names like Renee Hinden, but it could have been a possibility. The only memories I really have with him when I was like, really young, and don't remember ever having a personal conversation with him or anything like that. But he made some funny commercials for Kokanee.
I'm going to ask a couple more. I didn't know if you thought of anyone.
That was another plug. Did you notice how I got Kokanee beer in there?
Yeah, I'm trying to ignore them because if I ignore them, maybe
they're not legitimate unless Maz says so. Like
that's how I live my life.
I think Renee Hinden. It's a shame he never actually got to see one before he died. I will say that. I think that he put enough years in that he probably deserved to actually have an encounter.
I agree.
All right. Absolutely. I think we all should, right? Be so lucky.
Except for Eric Beckard. He gets no Bigfoot.
And me, actually, now I think about it. I haven't really done much. Anyway, how about Dr. Jeff Meldrum?
Mustache.
Sorry. Yeah, I've met Jeff Meldrum, when he came to our house, in 96. I haven't personally, stood in front of him and had a conversation with him since, but we've had some email conversations. I think Jeff Meldrum deserves a lot of credit for bringing legitimacy to the field through his work.
How about just the online community?
I think it's good. I think it's a good thing for the field to have an online community, have people sharing and banding together. I think it's can get a little out of control, and there's not enough legitimate sites or legitimate people running things the right way for it to be taken as a whole seriously. But for the most part, I think it does a lot of good.
Mike, again, thanks very much for joining us. We've appreciated your candor, the fun, the tolerance. It's just been an all-around good experience for us. I hope it's been a great experience for you. And thanks for coming on the show, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great experience. The tolerance, I only have to tolerate Maz, so that wasn't so bad.
Not as much as my mirror has to tolerate me, so... But
I just feel bad. I just feel bad for Danielle. I mean, when it comes down to it,
she knew what she was getting into. She had 10 years to decide, man.
10 years. She could have said no.
She could have. She's smart like a fox. But no, I thought I could think before we go. I'm gonna obviously summarize too, and I just wanted to. I think we're gonna make a little announcement or something like that. I don't know.
Oh yes, go ahead, Maz.
Are
you
we?
guys take it out?
I don't know. Are we?
You're supposed to.
Are we?
It's in the script.
Oh, we are, aren't we? Yeah.
If it's in the script, if we wrote it. So anyway, obviously, Mike and I are friends, and we're so honored that he decided to make this the first show he comes on. Hopefully we didn't ruin the experience for him. Maybe we did. Doesn't matter because we got him anyway. But, if anything, hopefully the people listening can see that Mike's sitting on a wealth of stories that only he can tell in regards to his father, and he is that link I talked about earlier to the past and seeing things through a new eyes. And I believe that there's so much information out there in books and other medium as relates to Bigfoot that is just regurgitated over and over again, and it's the same information and nothing new is mentioned. And Mike has a unique opportunity to tell part of history that hasn't been told before. So I'm proud to announce that Mike and I are working on something together that will help carry forward this legacy and let this new generation of people interested in Bigfoot, kids, adults, whoever, know about his father, and so that his voice will carry on. So we're just super excited about that, and we'll be working on that this year together.
Very well said.
That's great news. I'm looking forward to it.
I thought I'd say
First
one
thing I've heard about that, so I don't know what's going on.
Oh, well, we already drew it up. I got it. You signed it in blood, so we're good now. But, and like I said, Mike...
Just kidding.
Nah, it's cool, man. You're a good friend. Like I said, I never imagined, I'd make a friend off of eBay because I thought that's illegal and that's what Craigslist's for. You're a great guy and a great friend, and it just so happens to be that you have that relation, to Bigfoot community, and something that I got over really quick. I know you used to kind of creep you out, the whole I don't want to say fanboying out or whatever, but it's cool to be able to hear this stuff from you, but it's better to be able to call you my friend. So I appreciate that, and I know Sean, I'm probably speaking for you, but this has been great because Sean's never heard any of this or talked to Mike, as we've said. So it's awesome.
Yeah, it was a good experience. I had a lot of fun, guys, and I don't know, you probably can tell or whatever, but it makes me a little nervous, and it makes me a little awkward, and anytime anyone ever approaches me and treats me like I'm any type of celebrity, I kind of back off a little bit because it's just something I'm not used to, and I don't see myself that way whatsoever. But one thing I really do appreciate and I want to stress is the respect for my father, and the way that he's putting a good light and the respect that you guys have for him. It's something that he would appreciate, and it's something that I dearly appreciate. So I just want to thank both of you for that, and for keeping his memory as alive as we possibly can, and for having me on the show.
Our pleasure.
All right, well, thanks again, Mike, and we appreciate you spending time with us, and we look forward to another episode, and hope that you'll listen to future episodes of the Nocturnal Journal.
You've been listening to the Nocturnal Journal. Sean Forger and Maz Adams, in association with Pennsylvania Sasquatch Research. Check us out on Facebook and Forker Media.